Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 69 of Cisco Unplugged, your show for all things wireless. I'm Dan, your host, and I'm back here with Al. Al, how are you doing today?
Hey, Dan. Good to be here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. Good to see you.
Dude,
So, this week, we're going to be discussing wireless automation with Ansible, and we have a very special guest today joining us, Mr. Craig Egan. How are you doing today, Craig?
Good, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Hey,
thanks
Craig,
for being here.
maybe just a little bit about your background. You started as a Cisco SE, right?
Yes, I started as an SE, then I moved to the Meraki team. I was an SE in the Meraki team. And then when Meraki and Catalyst merged, I became an automation specialist supporting the SEs for our global enterprise networking team.
Nice.
So automation, obviously, you can be Cisco engineering without automation. How did you get into automation? What led you down this path?
I first got into it actually when I was a customer. We were doing a big Meraki deployment, and we needed to be able to scale really quickly. And the API is the best way to do that. And I had tried working with other APIs in the past through other vendors and really struggled with it. And the Meraki API is just a really great API to cut your teeth on when you want to start getting into automation. It's really user friendly. It's really well documented. And that really just opened like a can of worms for me where now I just want to automate everything.
That's awesome. Well, and I think it was the week before last, we had a session on workflows. And I think, so it's another sort of automation. I think this week, we're going to look a little more like an Ansible and really sort of amp it up a little bit, right? So we kind of take it to the next level. So workflow, good for there's a lot of basic workflows and stuff like that are built and it's simple to work with. And this, what we're going to talk about today, I think actually integrates with workflows if you wanted to do that, right? But I think at the end of the day, this gives you total 100% flexibility when we go down this route. So
Absolutely.
about this.
And really the design of this, it started as I had a lot of customers looking to move away from Meraki templates because templates could be really restrictive for some customers, especially when you want to do things like unique overrides or have more granular control over config deployments, things like that, because templates are kind of all or nothing. But what I found and what I want to do today, Dan and Al, is a lot of customers, when they were trying to develop their Ansible practice, ran into a lot of the consistent same stumbling blocks and kind of gotchas. So I kind of wanted to just do a deep dive today, walk through how I go about designing my Ansible environment, and give you guys some tips and tricks and point out some potential pitfalls that I see a lot of customers trip over. So this is not going to be an Ansible 101 session. This is really kind of targeted for people that are getting their feet wet with Ansible and then maybe running into some challenges and how to get through those.
Yeah, that sounds great. Before we get going here real quick, just a couple reminders here on the episode. We do take questions. If you have those, you can submit those on the YouTube chat or via Slido. And we are streaming this on YouTube. And you can always get that access to that content on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@getunplugged. Please go out there, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you are notified when we do go live with this great content like this and more. So I guess before we get into it, that's it for the reminders here. But can we? I guess I'm assuming most people know what Ansible is, but maybe we should just start there. What is Ansible, and how can it help us from an automation perspective?
Good question.
So Ansible is really a configuration orchestration tool at the end of the day. What it specializes in is pushing configuration out to lots of devices really quickly. It was first developed for Linux server admins. If you're working on virtual infrastructure, a lot of times you're just rubber stamping out Linux servers, right? They're database servers, they're web servers. So to be able to create repeatable, consistent configuration, this was a tool that was developed for them. And when the network guys found out about it, they were like, oh, I want to use that. Initially, for network automation, it involved SSHing into switches and routers and deploying CLI config to those devices. But it's kind of morphed into an API abstraction. So we can use it to basically simplify how we interact with the API and be able to do it at scale repeatably very quickly.
Nice. Thanks for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And there's some nuance to differences of using it to SSH into a device versus using it to interact with an API that we'll touch on today.
Great. Cool.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I'm ready when you guys are.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Let's dig in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me know when you can see my screen. Looks like it's coming up.
See it.
Oh, okay.
Yep, looks good.
So step zero of anything that you automate is really defining what it is you want to automate, right? What are you trying? What are the outcomes you're driving towards? For this demo that we're going to do today, it's wireless configuration across multiple sites. I want multiple sites to have really consistent SSIDs, authentication, everything for my wireless config across a couple sites that we're going to look at. I'm using Meraki today, but conceptually, you can do very similar things for on-prem infrastructure as well.
Yeah, this is great. I'm sure this is something a lot of our customers are working through day in and day out. So, great example.
And the wireless API in particular is interesting. We're going to dig into it. It can be one of our more complicated APIs to interact with because there are so many knobs. There's a ton of parameters that we're going to see here. So when I'm approaching something from an automation standpoint, rather than start from scratch from a blank sheet of paper, I always like to build, a golden config first. So I'll usually come into the GUI, configure something in the GUI, and then figure out what APIs I need to interact with that GUI element. So here we can see I have a couple of just like default kind of placeholder SSIDs set up here. The first thing I want to do is identify what API do I need to use to configure these SSIDs. And for Meraki, I'm going to developer.cisco.com. If you guys remember nothing from this call today, remember developer.cisco.com. This is your one-stop shop for learning labs, documentation, code exchange resources, all of that goodness across all Cisco products are at developer.cisco.com. So I'm here on the Meraki API docs, and I'm in the wireless section. These docs are searchable, but I feel like they're pretty intuitively organized. If I'm looking for wireless config, it's going to be in the wireless configure section. So I'm down here on SSIDs, and now I can see the two APIs I want to work with are, I want to first use a get to understand what is configured, what does the API structure look like. There's this concept that if you're using Ansible, you don't really need to be familiar with the API because it's a full abstraction layer. And I think that it's going to lead you down a difficult path when you need to troubleshoot something. So having a basic understanding of the API, you don't need to be a full-blown developer, but understanding what kind of data structures it's expecting, what it's going to return, I think is really, really helpful when you're troubleshooting Ansible because it, at the end of the day, is interacting with the API. Right? So once I've identified the APIs I want to work with, I go and look at what parameters it's expecting. And this is what I mean when wireless can be a difficult one because there are so many parameters that we can configure for wireless. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you guys can just see how long this list is. Tons and tons and tons of knobs for wireless. So once I've identified the APIs I want to work with, before I jump into Ansible, I like to test that API and just make sure it's behaving how I think it's going to behave. And for that, I like to use Postman. So here in Postman, on this test network, I was just running a get to return back the body of the SSIDs that are configured and look at all the kind of knobs there are there. Now, in Ansible, there's this concept of idempotency. And what idempotency means in terms of Ansible is it's not going to make a change unless it determines that it needs to make a change. How does Ansible do that? For any given API, before it does a post to create something or a put to modify something, it'll first do a get. And it'll look at what you're telling it, what is your intended state, and it'll look at the current state. It'll diff those two things. And then it'll say, oh, I need to make a change. What I'm expecting to be there is not there. Or, hey, these things match. I don't need to make a change. This ideally, when you're working with an API, what that means is when you run an API for a GET, it matches the exact body that you would send with a post or a put. Now, that's not always the case. With the Meraki API, there are some nuances for things like radius servers. When I'm configuring a radius server, and let me scroll down here until I get to a section with radius server, that radius server config would include like a pre-shared key or shared secret, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's not exposed here. So little nuances like that you have to kind of be aware of. If you try to jump right into Ansible and troubleshoot missing parameters in the API that way, it's going to be much, much more challenging. So what I like to do is I go test those things with the API first. So here I have taken an example SSID config, lifted that body out of that GET, and then brought it over here into this post that I'm going to send this put. And I just wanted to make sure that the API is behaving how I think it should be behaving. I see this body is accepted. I've got a 200 okay. Now, the nice thing about the Ansible Meraki collection is it is generated off of our raw API spec itself. If you had looked at Meraki Ansible a couple of years ago, it's what I like to call artisanal Python. It was handwritten by a guy who was basically writing code to interact with the API. And when he was doing that, he was making like little changes to the parameter names. Maybe he would change it uppercase to a lowercase here, or maybe instead of a camel case, he would do a snake case and have an underscore. And basically it meant that the parameters that Ansible was expecting did not line up one-to-one with what the API was expecting. We've got rid of that. Now that we're generating off the spec, the nice thing is I can take all these key value pairs, take them out of this JSON, convert them to YAML, and I know they'll work in my Ansible environment. So right now to this point, we haven't touched Ansible. We've just been building confidence, right? Mm-hmm. We know what we want to automate. We know what APIs it's using. We know what the body of the API looks like. We know that the API is functioning like we think it should be. So now we're ready to start coming over to Ansible and building our environment. And the first thing you want to look at in Ansible is, what does your inventory look like? Inventory basically defines what devices you want Ansible to interact with. In the world of SSH, these are going to be the actual end devices that you're going to SSH into. But in the world of an API, it's a little bit different because now we can create constructs of things that we don't necessarily SSH into. For example, in Meraki, if I go back to look at the documentation real quick, I know that to interact with the wireless SSID config, I need a network ID. In Meraki, you don't apply wireless configuration at a per AP or per device level. You apply it at a network-wide level. Well, a network isn't something you can SSH into. It's a construct, right, within mm-hmm. dashboard. Mm-hmm. Ansible doesn't care about that. It just cares that you have a target that you are going to apply some configuration to, and you can address it with the API in this case. So you'll notice in my inventory here, the way I've structured my Ansible inventory, I have, even though it's called host, this is a vestigial element of the old, I'm an SSH into a Linux server world. It parses it the same way, where I can create objects in this inventory like networks, which are not discrete things. This is something weird that I do that I haven't seen a lot of people do. Your other option is to basically have raw YAML files that you attach configuration to that are part of the inventory. Pros and cons to that. We can talk about that more. But in this inventory, what I've done is I've taken a couple of sites. I have a site called Craig SpokeNet. I have a site called Craig Beta Z4. And these sites have devices attached to them. This site has an AP. This site has a full stack Meraki gear. In Ansible, one of the things that I love about Ansible is I can attach configuration data at any level of this hierarchy. If I want configuration to apply to all devices, if I want configuration to just apply to this site, if I want configuration that's device specific, anywhere in this hierarchy, you can attach config.
Yeah, Craig.
Do that. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We have a question here, and I think it's around like testing And so let's say I'm newer to this, I'm wanting to learn, I want to do this in a sandbox or a test type environment.
Absolutely.
Can I do that? What would you recommend as far as getting started? What maybe some best practice around? Could I start with a test network basically, and just maybe have some test gear in that network and start there, do some testing, and then go from there? Or
100%. Yeah, we will crawl, walk, run our way up to this. So start with a lab site, right, where you have a handful of gear, and then it can be in I've seen customers approach this two different ways. Sometimes they want their lab site completely isolated from their production org, and they'll spin up a whole new Meraki organization for just that lab site. Other customers I see, they'll have a lab site attached to their prod org. It will just be a non-production site within that Meraki organization.
Sure. Okay. So a couple of options there.
Yeah, a couple of options, but definitely as we're kind of crawl, walk, running our way up to this, when I was first interacting with that API, you would do that against a lab site, right? When you're first structuring your inventory, we'll start with just a lab network.
Yeah.
I like to use, this YAML style inventory within Ansible, but where this starts to have challenges is when you really want to scale big, because this is a single flat file. And this works well for, a few hundred to maybe like a couple thousand devices. But when you have a really large inventory, Ansible supports what's called a dynamic inventory plugin, where I can actually point this at an external source of truth, like a ServiceNow CMDB or Netbox or something like that. And I can dynamically generate that inventory. And the same constructs apply, where essentially I'm grouping devices in the logical groups. So, here I have a group that represents a site, but I also have these same devices in different groups representing their device types. In Netbox, this would be like a role, for instance. And this is arbitrary. You can deeply nest this however much you want, right? You can have it broken down into regions, east, west, central, or states, or prod and pre-prod. However you want to structure your inventory, it's arbitrary. It's up to you. But when it comes to how do you attach config to those different levels in the hierarchy, that's where the group vars come in. So for instance, for a group all, I might have things statically defined like my org ID or my org name, my Meraki API key that I want to use, which you can see here. I've actually hidden this. It's not in plain text. You don't want to put this up in a Git repo somewhere, right? So I've locked this behind an environment key. Which this works well for CI/CD. That's a more advanced topic, but we can get into that too. So things at the all level, things that are true for all of my organization. But when I want to get down to configuration, let's say for individual device types like switches, or in our case for wireless, we want to apply that at the network level. So here I have taken that JSON that we were looking at earlier, and I've converted it into YAML. But the structure is the same. It's a list of key value pairs, of dictionaries, and list items that I've taken exactly out of the API, and I have YAMLified it into this. So this is actually where my config data lives. And if I wanted to, there's this concept in Ansible of variable inheritance, where things lower in the hierarchy will inherit this config data, but there's also a concept of variable precedence. And just like with routing, more specific wins. So let's say I have this config here. I want to apply to all networks, but I have some Snowflake site somewhere. If you want to attach a different wireless config to a more specific place in the hierarchy, it will override this config. So it's more precedent. It wins. That's the config that would be applied. So it's really, really, really flexible with how you want to attach config and how you want to apply it. A stumbling block I see a lot of customers get into when they're structuring their inventory, YAML is extremely white case sensitive. If you have an errant space in here somewhere, it can break the whole parsing of your inventory file. And something I wish I knew when I was starting, Ansible actually has a built-in tool to help with that. Let me pull up my terminal window here. Let me just clear my screen. is called Ansible inventory. And using this Ansible inventory tool, you can test that your inventory is being parsed correctly. So there's a couple parameters you can pass it. So I'm using this demo inventory. I call it RH demo inventory. And the first thing I want to test is my inventory file being parsed correctly? Yes, it is. I can see that I have the right groups. I have the right endpoints in those groups that I want to attach config to. All this is looking very, very good. So I know my inventory file is at least being parsed correctly. Now, is my variable data and my group vars actually being parsed correctly? And there's another inventory command that you can run for that using the host parameter. So now I'm looking for a particular item in the inventory called Craig Beta Z4 Network. And I want to see what all config data, all variable data is attached to that device. And here I can see all of that wireless config that I had is being inherited, as well as the stuff from the all group. So remember, I built my config here at this network group. This thing inherited that config. This device would also inherit that same config, this network. And we'll show that in a second. So that's how you can write config once and be able to have it apply to a lot of different places by this concept of group variable inheritance within Ansible. Now, again, I like putting my config data into my inventory group vars. I've seen some other people, rather than put the variable data attached to inventory, they'll have it as a standalone YAML file that they suck into the playbook. So there's pros and cons to that approach. One of the pros is that YAML file can be used in multiple orchestration tools. So I've seen people use it in Terraform, where, hey, I'm actually testing Terraform. I have my golden config that I know is my crown jewels, and I'm agnostic on what my orchestration layer is. Maybe I want to try Ansible, and there's pros and cons. Maybe I want to try Terraform. All you care about is the crown jewels, which is your config. And if you want to do infrastructure as code, you can be agnostic about what your platform is. So that's one pro to it. But one of the cons is not having that sort of flexibility to override config, to inherit config that you get by attaching those things to inventory. So that's why I like to leverage the built-in Ansible inventory constructs to configure those things. So the keen-eyed among you may have noticed we have not actually touched an Ansible playbook yet, right? We've just been prepping to this point. We're building confidence. We've identified the APIs. We've identified the parameters. We've tested it in Postman. We've built our inventory. We know our inventory is parsing correctly. So now we're at the point where we're ready to actually go design and build a playbook. And this is where a lot more stumbling points can happen. So the advice that I have for customers is keep your playbooks as atomic as possible. If I wanted to write one giant master playbook to rule them all, and it configured switching and wireless and routing and firewalls and group policy and a million things, you could do that. But you've just created a huge blast radius for failure, right? If somebody goes and modifies that playbook and they have some syntactical error, they could have just broken the whole thing. So keeping your playbooks really, really atomic kind of reduces that blast radius of failure, where all my other playbooks here for MXs, for switches, for cameras, whatever, those each stand alone as individuals that can be modified or tweaked. And then to tie everything together, not a topic for this call today, maybe another call, but I like to use a CI/CD pipeline to kind of control and orchestrate when those playbooks execute and in what order they execute. So keeping the playbook atomic, we're just doing wireless configuration and that's it, right? The first thing I like to do when I'm writing this playbook is I variabilize what I'm targeting. So this host section here, again, you have complete flexibility of how you scope execution of this. Do I want to upgrade or update config for a single site, for a subset of sites, a large group of sites, for all sites? By variabilizing this, I can pass in that scope at runtime and not have to go and modify my playbook every time I want to do it. Again, if you're storing your playbooks in your Git repositories, the idea is you don't want people going and touching these things. Once you have your playbook locked in, try not to modify it, unless you need to. So don't risk someone going and fat fingering something here and, again, causing a parsing error, syntax problem. Variabilize that data. The next thing that you run into that you might not see very often in Ansible is this serial command. So one of the really great things about the Meraki Python SDK is it gracefully handles the Meraki rate limit. Meraki has an API rate limit of 10 calls per second. And if you go over that, you'll get a 429 error. If you're using the native Python SDK, it'll intercept that 429, insert a back off timer, and then automatically retry that same API call after a pause period. However, Ansible, the core of Ansible, it sees all 400 level errors as errors, whether that's a 401, 403, 404, what have you, right? So if I get an API rate limit back from Ansible, Ansible will go, failure, stop execution, So what I have to do, because there's not kind of built-in graceful handling of the rate limit, I artificially throttle execution of the playbook. Ansible can go very, very, very fast. By running this serial command, it tells Ansible, hey, rather than go and configure, multiple sites in parallel, let's do one at a time. We're just going to do one at a time, and we're going to keep it, nice and slow, so we can kind of hover under that API rate limit. Next, so I have my playbook. That playbook is going to invoke this module. How did I figure out what module to use? Network wireless SSIDs. Where did I come up with that? I promise I don't make anything up on this call. Everything is documented. So to find out the module to use, I'm over here on Ansible Galaxy, which Ansible Galaxy has all of the Ansible collections across all our portfolio. So I'm going to scroll down to the Meraki section here. And this gives you some information about how to actually set up. Again, this isn't kind of a Ansible 101 call. We're not going through Ansible setup and installation. But here, all of these modules are documented. And again, these are generated off of the API spec itself. So to figure out what module you need, we actually use the path of the API URL. So the path for this particular API endpoint is networks, wireless, SSIDs. So in the documentation, if I go to networks, and you can see how many APIs we have, networks, wireless, SSIDs. This is the module I need to use. And you'll find if you read the documentation for this module, all these parameters, again, match all of the parameters defined in the API documentation, because again, we're generating off the raw API spec itself. So I've identified my...
Hey, Craig, can I just, so for my clarity, so you've mentioned modules, we've talked about playbooks, we talked about YAML, maybe, and then now we're talking sort of about the environment, right? The Ansible environment. When I think of modules, my brain goes to Python and loading modules and that sort of stuff. I don't know if I'm thinking about that correctly or not.
You absolutely
sort of tie this together to high level. How does all this kind of play together?
Sure. So Ansible is actually written in Python. It is a framework built on top of Python, and the modules, as they're called in Ansible, are actually functions within the Python collection for Meraki Ansible. So when you install this collection, it basically exposes, almost like you would pip install a module in Python. Same idea in Ansible. You do an Ansible Galaxy collection install and exposes those Python files, which contain those modules, to Ansible and Python. They're stored in a different place, typically in your file system. But it literally it's not just like a Python module. It is a Python module itself, because Ansible is written in Python. Yeah. So good question. Again, if we need to go back another session, Dan, and do like an Ansible 101, we can definitely do that and kind of get into like the inner mechanics of how Ansible works.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a module that is actually, if you were to go look at it under the hood, and I'll pop in there real quick just to show you, Al, you'll see it is actually a Python file. If we go look at the source code for this, here's a folder called modules, and here are all those Python files. There are all those modules. So we were just looking at networks, wireless, apologize for my rapid scrolling, SSIDs. And this is a Python file.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how Ansible is actually consuming these things. But this is where the abstraction comes in, right? This is where we're leveraging Ansible to be like, hey, I don't need to be a full-blown Python developer. I just want to be able to interact with the API using simple key value pairs.
Right. Okay.
So back to our playbook, we have our module. The next stumbling block is I have all these parameters that we looked at for wireless. I might have an IoT SSID and it's using a pre-shared key. And I have my enterprise SSID and we're doing .1x. And maybe I have a guest and it's doing a splash page for CWA, right? A lot of these configuration parameters are mutually exclusive from each other. If I'm doing .1x, I cannot have a PSK defined, right? How do I deal with that in a single playbook? And that's where this next trick comes in. So I have this object, right, that I'm calling wireless SSIDs. And this wireless SSIDs is a list. It is a list of SSIDs. That's what this hyphen denotes. I want to loop through this list. And for each SSID defined in this list or this network, I want to basically build an API body that contains these parameters that I've defined. Well, because I have PSK here, but not here, how do I do that with a single playbook and not have to write, 3 different playbooks for every permutation of SSID config I have? That's where Jinja comes in. So because, good you brought it up, Al, because we're using Python under the hood, we can start to leverage native Python functions with Jinja. So that's what this syntax is here, this pipe syntax. So I'm looping through that wireless SSID object. And for each item in that list, I'm building all these parameters. So I'm taking that variable value over here for my group vars, and I'm basically using what's called a Jinja filter. That's what this double bracket syntax is, a Jinja variable. Inside of there, I can apply a filter, and I'm using a filter called default omit. And basically what that does is it tells Ansible, hey, look for the value for the key of PSK, look through that list of items and see if there's a matching key called PSK. And if there is, insert it. If there isn't, drop the whole thing. So now I can have one single playbook that works for all these different parameters that may or may not exist per SSID. Hugely, hugely powerful. We have a saying in programming, it's called keep your code dry. Dry stands for don't repeat yourself. So rather than rewrite the same playbook for every single permutation of SSID config I could possibly have, I'm going to write it once. I'm going to leverage this filter so I can not have to rewrite the same playbook. And I'll just skip those variables that aren't defined.
Interesting.
So the last little trick that I do in here is I throw in a condition. And this came about when I started moving my playbooks to CI/CD pipelines. So, before when I was writing playbooks, I would have the knowledge that I need to target only devices that wireless config is going to be applicable to. But what if I want to have a pipeline and I'm doing wireless config and switch config and, MX config all on a single pipeline? I might want to target a site that has all those things. Well, if I try to run wireless configuration against a switch, it's going to fail, right? API is not going to accept that as a valid target. So that's when I throw in this little condition to just say, hey, make sure that whatever is in this list of things I'm going to loop through in Ansible make sure it's something that is applicable to this particular playbook. For the case of wireless is applied at the network level. So I make sure I'm targeting something that is a network object as I'm looping through my inventory. Okay. It looks like we're doing pretty good on time here. I know there's a lot to take in. I know it's really dense. Yeah. I speak quickly, but again, this is being recorded, so you guys can go back and reference this and pause and slow it down and whatever you need to do to kind of pick up some of these concepts, because they're not always intuitive.
Yeah, I have a question. Well, we're at a transition point here. I guess a little higher level question here. What would you call maybe some quick wins? And what I mean by that is maybe some small automation examples that deliver big value early on for someone to start.
There are a lot of APIs that function at the org-wide level.
Sure.
Setting up things like SAML authentication or consistent radius servers, right? We can define radius servers at the org level. Some of those things that you might not necessarily want to do through Ansible because you only do them once. But
sure.
Ansible not only is great for scaling a lot of networks within Meraki, but some of my largest customers, in order to continue to scale horizontally, they have multiple Meraki organizations. So, hey, I have this really great API and it's an org-wide config, and maybe I only need to apply that org-wide config once, but now if I have 10 orgs, well, I want to be consistent across orgs, right?
Sure.
So there's still ways that you can leverage those kind of things to your advantage to get consistent configuration. As far as quick wins, stuff like switch VLANs, that comes up a lot.
Sure.
Consistent VLAN configuration.
Sure.
2.1x, that comes up a lot. I want consistent .1x configuration. Those are the things that come into mind. When you want to get into like nuance of firewall policies, group policies, stuff like that, they can get harder. Another thing, and now this probably came up in your workflows demo, Ansible is, it's a vendor agnostic tool, but that makes it inherently a cross-domain tool. So using this same framework, I can go configure Meraki, but I can also go configure ICE, and I can go configure Catalyst Center. And now I can have a common set of config data that I can have apply in multiple places, right? Those kind of things are what come to mind.
That's good. Those are some good examples. One more follow-up question, I guess, is so you had mentioned, Craig, earlier about fat fingering something. You talked a little bit about, slowing things down, doing things site by site potentially versus all at once. I guess, how do you balance, I guess, we'll say it, automation with maybe human oversight? I know it's kind of another broad question, but
no, it's good. It's good. Again, with automation, another advantage to writing these playbooks in kind of an atomic fashion, you eat the elephant one bite at a time, right?
Yep.
So rather than say, hey, I have a full stack site, I need to configure every single element of this start to finish, top to bottom. You can do these one-off little things, right? Maybe you're hand configuring some elements, in the GUI, but then you start with switch ports or SSIDs or radius servers, these kind of one-off little things that you can make consistent. And that's how you can kind of balance it with humans, where you have humans that are going and checking these things. And again, the advantage. Remember, Dan, at the beginning of the call, I was talking about customer use cases that were driving Ansible adoption, templates being dangerous. If you want to test something and you want to make a change to a template, you do not have the option to only apply that change at a pilot site or a pre-prod site.
True.
You make a change to that Meraki template, you make it everywhere.
Yep.
And then how do customers work around this? They end up with templates wrong. So now I've seen customers with dozens or in some cases even 100, templates. And now they have this huge administrative overhead because they're like, okay, which template do I use for this? And okay, this site is using this template, and now it becomes an administrative nightmare, right?
Sure.
So it's really about having that surgical precision to be like, I built this and I only want to test it here in this one place. And then now that it's working, what's something I've said this whole call is we're building confidence, right? Now that I know it's working in pre-prod, I can start to scale it slowly as I want, right? I'll do a subset of sites, and then I'll do a bigger subset. And then maybe I feel confident to run it against all my sites, right? So having that level of control of, I don't have to do the whole config soup to nuts. I don't have to apply it everywhere. It helps you build a lot of confidence. Okay. And again, this is another advanced topic for maybe another session, but having your code stored in a Git repository and actually leveraging CI/CD pipelines for your execution is going to help this thing become enterprise grade. It gets it off of your machine. It gets it into a collaborative space where you can work on it with other people, and you have a full audit trail. You have a history of every config that was added, modified, changed, every pipeline execution that was run, all of the Ansible output from all the logging. That's why I love using either a CI/CD pipeline, or if you're a Red Hat customer, that's a big advantage of the Ansible automation platform itself. It's going to have a lot of those capabilities built into it. And it's the Ansible automation platform product that has the workflows integration as well.
Yeah.
So it can do triggers to kick off templates and stuff. But I think we're at a place where we can demo. I think we're ready to press play.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay. Let's hope the demo gods are with me. All right. So the culmination of all this. Before I press play on this command, play is not an actual command for Ansible playbook. I've just aliased it because I found myself which play. I found myself writing Ansible playbook so often that I wanted to shorten it. So I've shortened it. I've aliased it to play just to save myself a few keystrokes. But so here I'm going to take this playbook. I'm going to actually run it against all of the networks in my demo inventory, which is 2 networks. Okay. So again, Ansible won't make a change unless it has to, but it's gone through, and just this quickly, it has made 6 API calls. It's done a GET, it's done 12 API calls. It's done a GET for each of these SSIDs, determined, hey, based on what I got returned from the API, does it match what I've defined in Ansible? No, it doesn't. I need to go make a change. And it's done that across 2 different sites, this C4 site and this SpokeNet site. So if we go back to our dashboard and I refresh this page, you should see these SSID names. Now they're all enabled. I have my broadcast. I got .1x configured over here, a PSK here, and my CWA configured over here. And this should also be true on the other site, the Beta Z4 site. And it is. So yeah.
Wow.
That is infrastructure as code in a nutshell with Ansible.
So this is really, really cool stuff. And so the I guess from just a high level for a second, you created YAML files, which were called by your Ansible playbook, which were filtered by Jinja, right? So you could select things out of that YAML file specifically that you want to apply. And then the logic for, like you said, it's a configured already, it's not configured already. So I should reconfigure.
The item potency,
The data potency. That logic is built into Ansible already?
It is built into, so it's a construct that exists within Ansible natively, but for it to be implemented successfully, that is up to the module designer. So the guys that wrote and built the Meraki Ansible collection, they built it in a way where item potency would function correctly. So they basically said, hey, I've examined all of the API spec. I've examined where there are gets and there are analogous puts and posts. So I know for any given API put or post, I have its partner get. I'm going to run that first. I'm going to look at the JSON. I'm going to look at the YAML. I'm going to have them be in a common language that YAML actually gets converted to JSON. And then I'm going to diff those things. And yeah, it's all built into Ansible. That's one of the biggest things I like about Ansible is that ability to dip those things, because it's funny you bring up workflows, Al. I tried to do the same thing in workflows because I want a workflow to be able to execute successfully if something exists already or not. If it doesn't exist, create it. If it does exist, update it.
Mm-hmm.
In Ansible, you don't have to think about that when you're building your playbook. In workflows, you do. You have to consider that logic, and you have to build that into your workflow. It actually could be a lot more complex. But yeah, that capability native within Ansible. I don't have to think about it. I build my playbooks. And Al, another big advantage for that is brownfield adoption. No customer is deploying greenfield infrastructure as code. They have stuff out there.
Right.
So they want to be able to test, hey, I want to match my existing config. I like my existing config. Well, let's bring it into my lab site and test it. And if I actually rerun that Ansible playbook, you'll see what I mean. See how everything is green now instead of yellow?
Uh-huh.
Change up here. No change down here. So both Ansible has determined, hey, I do not need to make changes. Your intended config and your infrastructure as code files here in Ansible, they match what's already configured out there. We're good. So that's a way for you to validate, hey, I've built my infrastructure as code successfully. I'm not going to be making changes that are accidental, in prod.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things we were discussing prior to the session was you could actually do a workflow that calls Ansible, like I think we mentioned that, and then you can actually tie that to AI, right? So you can have an AI instance where it would call a workflow. The workflow would then, it may do some other things, but it could call some of these detailed functions then from an Ansible standpoint. So it gets pretty, it's the level of automation is very high, but the granularity is also very detailed, right?
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And that's under the hood. I mean, that's going to be the magic of how those AI assistants work, right? An LLM is never going to be capable of building a sophisticated automation like that. It can call an MCP tool to invoke that automation though, right? So this kind of stuff, this kind of skill set, even in the era of AI, I think is always going to be a valuable tool in the tool belt.
Well, and it's deterministic, right? That's what I like to find. When we work with AI, things aren't always super deterministic. I mean, I've learned with AI, never say never. As soon as I say never, that it's doing it. It's like, but the thing that I consistently see is you don't get the consistency that you do.
Right.
Something like this. This is very deterministic,
and that's I think in the future of AI, like that's how you drive consistency, is not relying on the LLM to actually be consistent. It's relying on the LLM to invoke the right MCPs to call that consistent automation, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. I agree. Yeah. That's at least my perspective. So I agree.
Well, this has been great.
Interesting.
Yeah, this has really been eye-opening, Craig. Thank you very much.
I do think it may be interesting at some point. We'll see what kind of feedback we get and stuff, but it might be interesting to do a hello world version of this.
Yeah,
I can go both ways, Al. I can do an Ansible 101, or we can do an advanced CI/CD pipeline session as well.
Because I think some of the capability of what we can do with it, if somebody's interested in getting started, even if we maybe just point them to stuff, right? So go here, something like that too. So
yeah.
And we have a lot of great resources on developer.cisco.com as well. So if you're looking for more of a 101 content, we have Ansible self-paced learning labs that'll kind of introduce you to the concepts, interacting with the Meraki collection.
Good.
That's great. Yeah. Speaking of that, just let us know if you have feedback. You can always email us at getunplugged@cisco.com. If you'd like to see more on this topic, that'd be great feedback. You can always DM us on Twitter X at Unplugged8211 or on Threads at Unplugged Connectivity. So let us know. This was really good. Like Alan said, thank you, Craig. Anything else you'd like to cover?
Not for me. Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome.
No,
Well, I think that's a wrap on another great episode here. Just want to remind everyone, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go out to youtube.com/@getunplugged. You'll see the first link is our schedule, our upcoming schedule. We are now booked out through the end of the year. So, thanks, Al, for a lot of help on that. Appreciate it. So excited for some great upcoming topics like today's show. Go out there, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. You'll be notified when we do go live with more great content like this. So I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, let me just throw in here real quick.
Yeah, please do.
That's those same feedback channels. If you have topics, you're listening to this and you have a topic and you're like, man, I really wish we get something on this. Give us some feedback. Let us know.
Yeah.
If there's something you'd like to, that you really like to see. Because
and we're always looking for guests too. Like we were talking to our customer this week. If you'd like to be on the show and want to suggest a topic, let us know.
Yeah, if it's something that benefits the community,
Exactly.
So
yeah. All right. I think that is it. Anything else, Sal?
No, that's it. Thank you.
All right. And let us know, like I said, if you want to get a hold of us, you can email us, or you can always get a hold of us through your account team. But thanks a lot. Thank you, Craig. Great job.
Time.
Appreciate your time. Until next time, stay connected and unplugged.
See you guys.